Okay, welcome to the ninth video in the Marine Invertebrate Biology course. And this is the fourth of the phylum Cnidaria. And we've covered Hydrozoa and Scyphozoa. So we're going to be looking at class Anthozoa now. This is the largest of the Cnidarian classes. It's probably the most complex, and so this is why we left it to last. Soft corals, sea anemones, and hard corals. Here's some more really fun terminology since you've had barely touched any terminology this term. So you have two subclasses, the Octocoralia, and that's easy to remember because all of these things, Gorgonian fans, sea whips, and soft corals, all have polyps with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tentacles. So if you see 8 tentacles, you'll know it's Octocoralia. And then you have Actinaria and Scleractinaria. Sclera meaning rock. Okay, and these are hard corals. And then Actinaria, anemones. Okay, so and those two make up Zoantharia. Anthozoa, some of the characteristics. We've seen some of them before, and some of them are a little bit different than other orders and classes. With the medusa that you saw in hydrozoans and scyphozoans, that was either a dispersal or a planktonic life stage. These ones have no medusa stage. Okay, so they can have a dispersal phase of broadcast spawning where eggs of sperm are released up into the water column, but no planktonic adult stage, no medusa stage. So that could be solitary or the colonial. Like solitary would be an anemone, colonial would be a coral. They can, and they, as we just said before, sexually reproduction by broadcast spawning, or they can asexually reproduction by budding. And if you think about a hard coral, like a big coral head, or a sea whip, or like a sea fan, then all the polyps in that colony have come from the single original polyp, just like the colonial hydrozoan. Okay, as we said before, Octocoralia, that means that they have 8 individual tentacles on each zooid or each little individual. So if you see these things, the 8, especially the bigger ones, the 8 uh, tentacles will stand out quite well. And the text in yellow on this slide, there would be a hyperlink, which I'll put into the description or onto the Moodle page. It is really amazing diving in the tropics and seeing these little 8 tentacles grabbing for food. So these are sea whips and soft corals, some of which we have in New Zealand, soft corals. They're colonial. They're characterized by having 8 tentacles, as we said before. They usually are found in areas with high currents, and unlike the hard corals, the polyps are open during the day and feed during the day and they sort of rest up during the night, whereas the hard corals will be open during the night and then feed during the day as a predator avoidance strategy. So a little slideshow of what you're looking at. Sea whips. There's a polyp from the sea whips, and you can see the 8 tentacles. Sea pen, people go and look. They'll pay big money to go diving in Fjordland and go have a look at these in a very special conditions. Here is a sea fan and more sea fans, and our local species of a soft coral, which is called dead man's fingers. It looks like fingers that have gotten fuzzy from decay, and the Nemo type coral, all anthozoans, soft corals. Corals that you're going to see are mostly going to be colonial. There are a few solitary ones, but they tend to be deep water. So let's talk about the colonial ones. So this is a word that you're going to need to remember, Cnidarian is how the octocorals share food and information. And so if you touch an octocoral colony on one side of it, then you'll notice that the polyps on the other side will, after a little while, retreat into their protective um, housing as well. And so this looks something like this. So you have these little tubules within the housing that allow food and information to be shared. So let's say that this particular polyp is catching lots and lots of food. Because of its location, it can digest and share that food around to the rest of the colony. Okay, Zoantharia. So after moving on from Octocoralia, we are talking about the Actinaria, which are anemones, which are softer ones, and then Scleractinaria, sclere, again, another prefix that means rock, stony corals. Those are the hard corals. And they'll have 12 or more tentacles. So whereas Octocoralians had 8, these ones tend to have lots of tentacles. So these things are sea anemones. They don't have a skeleton like the octocorals do, so they can attach by a pedal disc, as we saw in the hydrozoans. The classic polyp form, and they have inside the body something called septa. So that we're getting a little bit more complexity, where the portions of the body, the body disc, can be separated by a little membrane into little separate sections, and that allows later on in some of the other phyla for the beginning of compartmentalization that will lead to organs. So here's another term to know, septa. And if we look at how a anemone, a classic Actinarian looks, then you can see these little sections. It's like a curtain, and that divides that portion of the body into sort of radially symmetrical sections. Moving on to the Zoantharia, Scleractinaria, moving on from Actinaria, we are talking about stony corals. So these ones will secrete a cup of calcium carbonate into which the body, stalk, and the tentacles of the polyp can retreat, and that is called the theca or corallite. Okay, and when you get big colonies of these, they can build up vast reefs like the Great Barrier Reef. And they are generally colonial, but in New Zealand, the Scleractinaria, the cup corals that we have, are solitary, and so they don't build large reefs. So here's a quick image of the theca into which the coral can retreat, the coral polyp. Here are some examples of different types of coral, and you can see that these ones, this brain coral, this is more like a channels, and the polyps can retreat into these channels. Okay, and then you have a individual solitary cup coral, like in New Zealand. So this gives a little bit of a place for the coral to retreat. Lots of different shapes and different types of theca in different species of corals. So the live corals can have lots of different shapes: digitate, palmate, plate, branching, encrusting. So lots to learn. Hopefully you'll take coral reef ecology next year. Get to see these in person. So just to reiterate, these polyps and these skeletons into which the polyps can withdraw can grow larger and larger as as new polyps grow on top of the old calcium carbonate shells, and they can be hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years old. Cross sections of coral colonies, just like trees, you can count the bands of growth, and they have different growth rates in different seasons. So if you have a seasonality, and even in the tropics where it doesn't change much, it can be rainy seasons or wet seasons or that kind of thing, you will find that there are different growth rates and they'll have dark and light bands. So you can count the rings and figure out how old a coral is. And like we said before, the hard corals uh, tend to feed at night, where the soft corals tend to feed during the day. So it's fantastic to go for a night dive while on a coral reef. This is with all the tentacles out at night, and it can be one of the most stunning things, one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see. So, why do they feed at night? There are two reasons, and both of them have to do with predator avoidance. One is the movement of zooplankton into the surface waters in the darkness. So they are larger, they tend to be larger organisms that are avoiding visual predators, fish and the like that are swimming around looking for zooplankton that they can feed on. So at night, those visual predators are not as able to see them, obviously, but their food, which is the phytoplankton that is in the water column, will still be there. That doesn't go away during the night, and so they go up and feed in the uh, night, but they're hiding away in the substrate or in the coral reef during the day. And so hopefully the coral reef can, with their tentacles, they can sting and catch those zooplankton, which are more abundant at night. But they also are trying to avoid the attention of the reef grazers, the daytime reef grazers, which are visual predators, um, called like things like parrotfish, which will graze away at polyps that are out. So the other thing that they can do is, even during the day, they're passively gaining some of the nutrients and the food that they need from something called zooxanthellae, which live in their tissues. And those zooxanthellae are symbiotic algae. So this is going to take a little bit longer than the last than a couple of minutes. So we're going to have a whole nother video, the next video on zooxanthellae, to finish up the information for Cnidaria. See you in the next video.